Oh, yeah. Nice. Is it on? Is this on? Am I mic'd? Yeah. Hello everyone, I am Sam, she, her, and today I'll be telling you guys about research collaborations, why you want them, how you start them, and how you make them successful. Oh, you know what, guys? Actually, this feels wrong. I feel like I can't give a talk about collaboration on my own. Can someone come up and help me? Oh gosh, Harry! Oh, thank God. We've collaborated before. I think this is really going to work out. Harry, introduce yourself.
Gotta change the slide.
Oh yeah. Oh, much better.
Hi everyone, my name is Harry. My pronouns are he, him. At last year's ICFP, Sam and I gave a tag team talk, and people seemed to like it. And my friend Joe, who's sitting in the audience now, texted me and said, this is great. You guys should do a talk on collaboration. Wouldn't that be funny? And I turned to Leo, who was standing next to me, and I said, look at this funny text from Joe. And he said, wait, I'm in charge of PLMW at POPL'. You're doing that. Oh, okay.
And now we're doing it.
Now we're doing it.
Just a little note on questions. Since it's a two-people one, just hold them to the end. But we've left plenty of time for them.
Thank you. Okay, so let's get started. Why should you think about collaborating in your research? I think the short version is that research is fundamentally collaborative. It's sort of hard to do research without collaborating, and collaboration is what makes the whole research community work. But I think there's some more specific reasons that you should consider collaboration. And so let's look at those now. First, collaboration brings more ideas. And speaking of more ideas, throughout this talk, you're going to see quotes from folks in the community who do a lot of collaboration that we decided to collaborate with and ask for their input. So the first quote is from Nadia Polikarpova, and she says that the research community is a distributed system made up of very small brains. And while each of us individually can't do much, communication and collaboration is how ideas are born. And that's certainly been true in my research. I've had a couple of ideas on my own, but by far the vast majority of the things that I've done have been in collaboration with others. That's just kind of how the ideas come to pass. Next, important expertise. So I have my things that I'm good at. I do property-based testing, and I think I know a lot about that. But there's plenty of things in PL and otherwise that I don't know about. I'm starting a project soon that's going to have some things to do with program synthesis. And rather than try to teach myself how to do program synthesis from scratch, I'm going to collaborate with folks who know it better and bring that expertise in so that I can be as effective as possible on that project. Next is new perspectives. So when I started my PhD, I had mostly a very pure PL perspective on the work that I was doing. But I got to a point where I wasn't sure what to do next. There were a lot of options available, and I kind of figured there were some options that I wasn't even seeing. And I didn't know how to move forward, how to decide what to do next. But a human-computer interaction professor came to Penn, Andrew Head, and in collaborating with him, I was able to borrow his perspective to bring some human-computer interaction into my research, and it's totally changed the way that I look at research and the way that I approach the work that I do. And none of that would have happened if I hadn't tried to collaborate. Next is maybe obvious, but important to state. Two heads are better than one. Simon Peyton-Jones says that if he just sits on his own, he goes round in circles. And I think that's true of me as well. You can sort of sit in your home alone and try to come up with the solution to this hard problem that's been vexing you, but you really often won't find the solution until you go and talk to someone who can help you reason through it. And finally, collaboration is really fun. Sam and I have been collaborating for the last year and a bit, and I visited Bristol, Sam visited Philly. It's been really great and fun to do collaborative research, certainly more fun than doing it alone. The big idea here is that you basically just can't do research effectively alone. Collaboration multiplies your effectiveness, makes a research community stronger, and everyone we spoke to for help with this said that collaboration's really a key part, and you can't avoid it. To illustrate, this is a new slide. To illustrate, my advisor, Benjamin Pierce, we had a 60th birthday celebration for him over the weekend, and he had this slide in a slide deck that he put up. This is the 2 books and 3 papers that he's written on his own in his whole career, and then the 113 papers and the 4 books he's written with collaborators. And I did some math, and it was at least 60 collaborators in total. So I think that's as good a reason as any to try to make collaboration part of what you do. So now Sam is going to tell you how to get started.
Yeah, hopefully we've convinced you that you do want a collaboration. So how do you get one? I thought I'd start by telling you our story. So let's take you back all the way to the student research competition at ICFP 2021. Harry submitted this poster to the competition, which is a really good idea. Submitting a poster to the student research competition is a great way to get feedback, develop an idea, and find a collaborator. And because I was working on an overlapping project, I went along to his presentation and really enjoyed it with my collaborators. Harry then emailed us to thank us for coming. That is something you can just do. You can just email someone. That is perfectly okay. And here's the email, because I thought I wanted to show you some things that Harry did well. So the first thing he did well is CC his supervisor. Maybe if you're a PhD student, you're less well known. It adds a bit of legitimacy to CC your supervisor, especially if your supervisor is Benjamin Pierce. Another thing I think Harry did really well is he was so enthusiastic. It's like, oh my gosh, thank you for coming. I really, enjoyed chatting to you guys. And he just really endeared himself to us by being super enthusiastic. His email was also extremely informative because he attached some of his code. So he said, oh, here's all my code. You can look at it if you want. His email was also specific. So he had 2 things that he wanted to get from us. He said, if possible, if you know, could you please answer these 2 specific questions? So it made it really easy to go, can we help you or can we not? There are 2 questions to answer. I then spent a week writing an email back. I didn't know if a week was way too long. I didn't know if I should be spending a week writing an email back. But the thing I should have done is acknowledged Harry's email. I should not have left him hanging for a week. So some logistics on emails. Acknowledge your emails. If someone sends you something really cool like this, say, oh, thank you for this. I'll take a look at it in the next week. And then he's not left like, is she looking at it? I don't know. Another tip is don't use BCC. So this is something I fell foul of when we were asking for our collaborations for this talk. I BCC'd everyone. Sometimes that can send your email straight into someone's spam. So maybe we would have had more quotes if I hadn't done that. So don't use BCC. And finally, sign your emails. Say best Sam. I had an intern who didn't do this and sent an email, and the recipient thought that they'd press send before they'd finish their email, and there was more content for the email. But she thought that she'd finished the email, and I had to be like, no, they think there's more. Send another email. So make sure you also sign your emails. Anyway, I spent a week, and here is an extract from the email that I sent back. So first of all, I took Harry's code and I annotated it with comments within an inch of its life. So I sent that code back and said, here are all of my thoughts. So I really engaged with what he'd sent me. I also returned your enthusiasm. I was equally enthusiastic, so I think that led to us wanting to collaborate together because we just shared the same enthusiasm. Because my email contained a lot of information, it had attachments, answers to his questions, all this stuff, I summarized what was in my email, so he knew exactly what he was getting from my response. I also decided to show a little bit of my personality, so his project was called Bidirectional Ungenerators, and I was like, hey, you should abbreviate that to bugs. It'll be cute.
There was a bug emoji in there and everything.
Yeah. We're still sad that we couldn't get that into the final paper. The next thing I did is I made sure I answered each point of the email he had sent to me. It seems like a simple thing, but it's commonly not done. Someone sends you 5 questions. and you only answer one, and that's just sad. So make sure you've answered all parts of the question. So I think I even said, here's the answer to question 1. My answer to question 2 is, I don't know, but here's why. So I made sure I addressed all parts of his email. Finally, I shared some of my work, because I was working on an overlapping project. I was like, you might be interested in what I've been up to. So we shared this enthusiasm. And then 2 years later, ICFP, last year, we were presenting our distinguished paper, and we hope that the rest of this presentation will help you get a successful collaboration too. Now that's just our story of how we ended up collaborating, but there are lots of other ways, and all these ways of starting a collaboration all share the same theme. It's all about showing interest in the work of others. And here's how you can get started with collaboration. Yeah, we took this yesterday. That's the Royal Albert Hall. The first thing you can do is introduce yourself. So before the break, turn to the person next to you, say hi, introduce yourself. During the break, go mingle. And I think we touched on mingling earlier, but there's all these little circles of nerds. Don't be afraid to join the circle. You're welcome in any circle. Just go quietly stand. Maybe they'll all turn to you and say, hey, introduce yourself. What's your name? Maybe they're just finishing off a conversation. You can wait for it to lull, and then they'll ask you to introduce yourself, or maybe you'll have some point to add to that conversation. So you can just introduce yourself. And if that's too scary, go join a circle with someone you already know. You now know me and Harry. Come join our circles. Another thing, you can get you don't have to introduce yourself. You can get yourself introduced. So ask your supervisor to introduce you to someone. It's their job. You can ask me or Harry. If we know someone, we'll do our best. And you could also ask another person in your research group as well. Or even better, something called matchmaking can happen. So ICFP was all the way in the States, so only a couple people in my research group went. I went around introducing myself to people, learning what they did, and I realized that someone was working on something very similar to a new PhD student in my group. And I said, oh, you should chat to her. I match-made them, and now they're collaborating, and I'm so proud. Another thing you can do is give talks. And again, this is something that you can just do. You can just email a university with a group that's working on the same sort of research as you and say, hey, can I give a talk on this? And if you don't have the funds to go in person, you could just do it virtually as well. It's great practice and a great way to get feedback. And one thing I want to point out is you don't need to present polished work. You can very much present unfinished work. Maybe someone in the audience has the answer. So my research group, we've got a seminar series, and we really do encourage unpolished, unfinished work. And if your research group does not have something like that, go start one. Another thing you can do is offer to help with projects. So there's a project that you really like, maybe you're using it in a different way than it was designed, or you think there's an extra feature. There's no harm in telling the original offer, hey, I'm doing this with your stuff. At minimum, they'll be really chuffed that someone's using their stuff. At maximum, they might go, oh, I never considered that. That's a really good idea. I would love to help you do that. And boom, you've got a collaborator. Finally, you can go to summer schools and make friends. So a summer school is a week or two long trip where a bunch of academics give courses on PL foundations. So common ones include OPLSS in Oregon, SPLV up in Scotland, MGS Plus, there's loads of them. And they're another great way, like PLMW, to make your cohort of PhD students make friends. I went to SPLV up in Scotland, and I had the best time. I made a bunch of friends with people at Chalmers, and that led to me going to visit them and give them a presentation. And also, when you have more friends, conferences are a lot less intimidating, because I look around a room and I go, oh gosh, thank God I know some of these people. I can go join those circles. And also, it meant I got to know the academics outside of my research group, which if I ever want to go back home to Scotland, maybe that might help me get a job. I hope so. Who knows? When we asked our experts for their advice about starting collaborations, they had advice on both parts of it, finding that potential collaborator and turning that potential collaborator into a concrete collaborator. So the first quote is from John Hughes, and I think the key points here are, there's no substitute for actually meeting someone. That is the best way to work out if they're going to be the right collaborator for you. And the way you know if it's the right collaboration for you is if it's like a natural continuation of the conversation. I think he really puts that well. It shouldn't feel jarred, it should just feel natural. And then for turning that potential collaborator into a concrete one, my supervisor gave us this quote. I think the key takeaways here are, if you want something from someone, be upfront about that. Say, hey, I'd really love to do this with you. Are you able to do this? And the further in advance you tell them that, the more likely they are to be able to help, because they can think, oh, can I actually do this? Do I have the bandwidth? Can I make the bandwidth? Because they asked in advance. And that's all really helpful. And then when you're having that helpful chat with someone, make sure you spend 5-10 minutes at the end deciding with that person how you both want to proceed and agree that with them. Now, almost everything I've just said about starting a collaboration involves socialization. So remember to pace yourself, especially if you're an introvert. We're both introverts. Like, I came here and I did my first day and I was like, oh my God, I forgot how tiring this is. So just remember, you do not need to attend everything. You can skip a talk, you can skip a session, you can go have a nap in your room. That's especially understandable if you're jet lagged. I'm certainly very jet lagged from my trip from Bristol in England. You can also opt out of chatting to people on the breaks by just going and sitting quietly in the corner or quietly in a room just to recharge slightly. And there's no pressure to go networking every evening, going for dinner with people. If you really need to recharge yourself, just have a dinner by yourself in your room. And the key thing that I like to do is I like to have friends that drain my social battery less, and I alternate between hanging out with them and then networking. So I sort of bounce between those two things. I've got a rest place with my friends like Harry, but I can also go and network. You're not wasting opportunities by looking after yourself. You're actually making the most of them because you're ensuring that you've got the energy when it counts. So pace yourself. And now I'm going to tell you about recognizing Harry, what is this American rubbish?
I just thought that if we changed all the spellings to American spellings, I would feel more at home here in the UK.
This is just like the Great Spelling War of 2022.
Wait, I thought we don't talk about that.
Well, we're talking about it now. After all, it is a great example of a research conflict. Back in the spring of 2022, we realized we had to pick between proper British spelling and American rubbish. We decided to write our paper with British spelling, and that is that.
Hang on. Don't change the slide freely and not debate with me. Why should a tiny island across the sea regulate the use of Z?
Fine, I will rock, paper, scissors you for it. You ready? Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. See, I win. That was a dramatic retelling of how Harry and I settled which version of English to write our paper in.
Yeah, we actually did that. We rock, paper, scissors to figure out which spelling we should use, which in retrospect wasn't a great idea because that stuff actually matters, for example, if you're trying to splice that paper into your dissertation. So this is all goes to say you should communicate about these challenges and decide them rationally rather than just doing rock, paper, scissors.
But of course, other collaborations might have bigger differences than UK versus US spelling, and I'll go on to that now. So I've been lucky enough to work with a Japanese collaborator. This is me in Japan, and that's obviously got a much greater cultural difference. And I thought it'd be really useful to point out those differences because I really enjoyed learning about them. Those differences can lead to a really productive collaboration because you've got different perspectives, different points of view. And it's really important to be aware of these differences and approach them with an open mind and respect so that they don't turn into challenges. Okay? Yeah, thank you. So one of the differences is language. Harry and I may have joked about the difference between American and British spelling, but that's nothing compared to the difference between Japanese and English. They've got a whole different writing system, which I did know before this collaboration. But they also have sounds, like we've got sounds in English that Japanese doesn't have. And that's something that I didn't know and was fascinated to learn about. I think I'm very lucky to natively speak the language that research is generally conducted in, because I can only imagine how hard it is to present or write a technical paper in another language. Heck, I have this streak on Duolingo, learning German. And while I'm very good at, ordering in a restaurant, I still need to ask native speakers to slow down and be patient, which is why I'm more than happy to show any collaborator a similar respect and admiration. Another difference is holidays. So in the UK, Christmas is probably the biggest holiday. Like, the whole country just grinds to a halt. And this is a really important piece of information to share with your collaborator, especially if they don't celebrate it, because this means I can enjoy my holiday eating my mince pies, and they're not left waiting for me. So the UK-US example of this unshared holiday is Thanksgiving. So I don't celebrate Thanksgiving, but I understand it's a really important holiday in the US. So of course, I was more than happy for Harry to take that week off, and we arranged our workloads accordingly. One thing I noticed, a main difference between England and Japan is they've got different work cultures, and the two main things I noticed is firstly, respect is shown differently. So in the UK, I might be busy mates with my supervisor, and being cheeky to a senior person can be seen as charming and a sign of respect, because being able to joke with them shows that you respect them. I got the impression in Japan that respect was shown more traditionally, by being a willing and diligent student working for a supportive mentor. More like a knight squire relationship as opposed to the parental one that can occur in the UK. The other difference in work cultures that I noticed was the working hours. So in the UK, we generally work 9 to 5, unless there's a deadline coming. And if there's a meeting and it's approaching 5, the meeting is going to stop at 5. In Japan, the meeting doesn't stop at 5. It keeps going till we've discussed everything. And if that goes over a meal time, the meeting will just move to a restaurant. And I'm really happy that my supervisor told me this before I went, because I'm someone that gets really grumpy if they're hungry. So I could prepare accordingly for these evening meetings and help make them as productive as possible. The final one is an obvious one, time difference. Harry is 5 hours behind me, which I really enjoyed, because it meant I had time in the morning to do all my homework before we met. Japan is 8 hours ahead, which isn't very helpful at all for arranging virtual meetings, because the overlapping in working hours is very small. Some logistical tips that I use to tackle this: I put my collaborators' time zones on the calendar, so I could always see what time a meeting would be for them. And another thing I did was, for my Japanese collaborator, I always kept his favorite time just free, because he was the hardest person to meet with, so I gave him priority. And of course, we made the effort to visit in person. So over my collaborations, two main things became clear to me. And I'm going to focus on the sort of Japanese motivation for this, but the same is true for my collaboration with Harry. The first one is how taking the time to learn about and respect the other culture really pays off. So I started to learn Japanese on Duolingo. I didn't get very far at all. I didn't really get past the alphabet, really. But it really helped my understanding of the Japanese culture. And the second one is like the importance of an in-person visit. It's the classic thing I'd read about, been told about, all these differences, but I couldn't really get a hold of them until I'd experienced them firsthand. I gained so much from my visit to Japan. Not only was it some collaboration time without time difference, but I think being surrounded by the culture and getting to experience it firsthand really helped my understanding of my collaborator and helped our collaboration going forward, because I understood their life better and I knew what their perspective was. So of course, this is just based off my experiences, and there could be other differences, but the key thing to remember is to approach them with respect, and they will just be differences and not challenges. So that's in depth a potential challenge that I've experienced, but there are lots of other ones. For example, if there's lots of people involved in a project, it's simply logistically harder. So if you're in a meeting with 5 people and you want to hear from everyone, that meeting's simply going to take longer. Equally, it's a lot harder to arrange a meeting for 5 people than it is for 2 people. And that's backed up by a quote from my supervisor. He says, there could be a significant overhead as the result of a collaboration, especially when more than 2 parties are involved. Another challenge could be difference in experience. This could make communication slow, or it could lead to a misunderstanding. So that's something to be aware of. Another thing is lack of confidence. So as a PhD student, it might be hard to say what you think, especially if you're disagreeing with someone more senior or someone more confident than you. Remember, just because it's said with confidence doesn't mean it's right. Overall, don't be afraid to express what you think. There's nothing wrong with being wrong, and aim to create a collaboration environment where you feel comfortable expressing yourself, no matter if you're going to be wrong, if you're going to be disagreeing with something. You feel comfortable being heard. Also, being too possessive or territorial can also lead to conflict. Remember, it's all about making the paper or the work in general better. It's not about who did what. All changes are for the good of the paper. So you should always feel free to iterate on the work of others with a view of making the work better. Finally, we need to take a moment to address the fact that sometimes collaborations can go really wrong. Collaborators in a position of power, perhaps because they're more senior or because they provide hard-to-find expertise, may abuse that power. Dealing with the power dynamics inherent to research relationships is really a topic for a whole other talk, which we're not qualified to present, but there's one piece of advice that we want to give, and that's don't collaborate alone. So we recommend always going into research collaborations with someone else you trust, for example, your advisor. Bad actors may see collaborations as opportunities to get free labor, enlist unwanted social relations, or build themselves up at the expense of others. Our community has programs like SIGPAP Plan Cares to help with problematic scenarios like this, but the immediate situation will be much easier to deal with if there's already someone you trust involved. So don't collaborate alone. The main thing to remember is to be kind. There might be other things at play. We've got another great quote from Nadia that I think really sums this up. I've had situations when in the heat of the deadline I swore I'd never work with this person again. But when the dust settled, I realized that what we've done is some of my best work, and I couldn't have done it myself and came to appreciate my collaborator very much. And this also leads nicely on to when collaborations don't work out, because the quote continues as, but there are other times when you realize that your opinion is simply not valued, and the final result is not worth suffering. Then you just don't work with that person again. If a collaboration doesn't work out, that's completely fine, and that's backed up by what my supervisor says. He points out that not all people can work well together, so expect some collaborations to fail. So don't worry if it doesn't work out, but Harry will now tell you the best way to create a successful environment for your collaborations.
Okay, so how do you make your collaborations as successful as possible? I think I wanted to address this by splitting this in kind of two parts. I think when you go into a collaboration, and especially if you're the one initiating it, often there's really a dual role for you in that collaboration. You're both a leader and a participant. And so I'm going to break it down like that and talk to you about how to lead a collaboration and how to participate in one. As a leader in a collaboration, I think people sometimes think of leadership as a power thing, but it's really not. Being a leader is having a responsibility to the group that you're leading to keep it organized and to keep it moving correctly. And so you should think of it that way. Anything as a leader that is blocking the team's progress is your responsibility to address. It's not necessarily your responsibility to solve that problem yourself, but it's your responsibility to make sure it gets solved. This includes issues with social dynamics, missing expertise, not enough person power to do the job. All of these things are things that when you collaborate, you should think about trying to be able to address. There's some logistical notes that might help with this. For example, scheduling regular meetings is a good way to keep everyone on the same page, and being on the same page with technical details that don't matter much, except you have to pick something. So for example, how a paper gets written or how versions are controlled and that sort of thing. Being on the same page and having it not be up in the air and undefined is really helpful. Another thing you need to do as a leader in a collaboration is set goals. So there are tangible goals that you could set, for example, being able to write a research paper or complete some code artifact. And then there are intangible goals such as everyone's learning objectives and also having fun. I think that's a good goal as well. For some of these goals, you're going to want to be pretty careful in the way you specify them. So there's this framework called SMART goals, which you might have heard of. A SMART goal is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bounded. So to give you an example, suppose we're going to write a paper. Well, we need to be specific about what the topic of that paper is. We should be able to measure our success by the contributions that we are able to make. That goal should be achievable. So maybe we've already accomplished one of the contributions, which makes us feel like, oh, we can definitely move on and do the rest. We want the goal to be relevant. Maybe we want to submit this goal to POPL, submit this paper to POPL, which is relevant to our career goals and things like that. And then time-bounded. The POPL deadline's in July. Let's make sure that's done by July. Of course, this is research, and things are fuzzy, so you may also prefer to make the goal smart-ish. Maybe the topic isn't perfectly defined, or one of the contributions is, as of right now, missing. Maybe you don't exactly know where you're submitting this paper or when the deadline is. But the point is to think about these things and go into a collaboration intentionally, sort of with a clear idea of what you want to get done, so that you sort of know when you're done and you also can succeed at it. Another thing that's really important as a leader, and I touched on this a little bit before, is that delegating tasks is super important. Every task needs a point person, someone who's willing to do the heavy lifting on it. And often, if you don't know who's in charge of the task, it's probably you. That doesn't mean you have to do it, like I said, but it does mean you have to figure out who is going to do it, which means you need to delegate. And this can be kind of hard and awkward as a PhD student. Sometimes you need to delegate tasks to your superiors, to your people who are your senior. But actually, I think it's really valuable to learn to push through that awkwardness. First of all, I think the senior people in your group will appreciate that someone has a top-down view of the project and that they're sort of told what is needed of them. But also, I think that this has been a real competitive advantage for me in my career is sort of taking the initiative in those situations and just saying, okay, here's what has to get done, and just telling folks what needs to get done. So that everything actually does get done. Then as a participant in a collaboration, it's really important that you know what your strengths are. So this is a quote from Benjamin Pierce. Different people have different strengths. If you find out what you in particular can bring to collaborations that's special, then that's great. For Benjamin, it's the skill of being able to imagine himself in the position of someone that doesn't already understand what they're trying to explain, because it helps to make sure that everything's explainable to everyone. For me, I tend to be good at sort of painting the high-level picture of a project and dealing with the organization and that sort of thing. And when you're in a group, you want to try to make sure that those strengths work well together. So for Sam's and my collaboration, we are both pretty organized type A people with a good top-down view. And so we sort of understand how each other think, and it was really easy for us to collaborate because of that. On the other hand, when Sam and I write talks together, our strengths complement each other. Sam is much more creative and excitable, whereas I'm quite a bit more serious, and I try to rein some of that in.
The fireworks were too much. I see that now.
But either way, whether you're playing off each other, sort of synergizing your strengths, or playing off each other's strengths and working together in that way, the point is to just know what you're good at and what your collaborators are good at, so you're working with those strengths instead of against them. To measure success, did you achieve your SMART goal? Was the experience more enjoyable than it was stressful? That's a hard one. And do we want to continue collaborating? Or at least would we be open to in the future if there was an idea to collaborate on? Ohad says that in a successful collaboration, everyone feels like others have done more. And I think that's really true, because if you're collaborating effectively and multiplying each other's potential, then no one feels like they've done that much, but the project gets done and everyone's happy with it. The whole point is we couldn't have done this alone, so I want to thank everyone who contributed quotes and ideas. We really appreciated it.
So now go back to your research groups and discuss how you can get started with collaboration.
Thank you. We have time for questions.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. I especially appreciated the section on recognizing challenges, and I was wondering if you had any insights on how to resolve conflicts if you already find yourself in the midst of one of those challenges.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think at the early stages of conflict, openly communicating is really the best option, sort of making it clear that there is something that isn't going great for everyone, and being sort of non-judgmental about it, and not sort of jumping straight to this is the worst person ever, but instead sort of dealing with this with communication. If things have sort of devolved past that point, I think this is a great instance where the don't collaborate alone idea is important. Having an advisor in the loop, having folks who can help to mediate conflict is also really valuable. I don't think there's anything unique about conflict resolution in research settings versus conflict resolution in general. It's a hard problem, but that's my general take.
It's all about just expressing how you feel and because you're in charge of how you feel, but don't be like, you made me sad. Just say, I don't feel comfortable with this, and just explain your position in a sort of like a non-confrontational way. And if you don't already have someone you trust involved, hopefully you have an advisor that you can go to and go, this is a scenario, can you help me navigate this? And hopefully that would help.
Thanks for the great insights.
Yeah, so maybe a bit of a tricky one, but I guess, do you have any advice on, like, if you're managing your own collaborations, how to deal with things like authorship order, and that kind of thing?
It's another good thing to just discuss up front. I think the earlier things are brought up, the easier they are. Like if you get all the way down and then something comes like out of the blue, it's never as good. Whereas if things are like if everyone is always on the same page, that's a nice, easy way to deal with it. It's like the classic rom-com where someone tells a line, it grows and grows and grows. As long as you're always honest and open, hopefully you won't get into that scenario.
Yes.
Oh, as in like sort of methods for deciding sort of in the first place if there's a collaboration starting, like, in terms of, I guess this comes along with like expectations for what sort of role people are taking, or like initially if it's like everyone's on the same page, do you just say, everyone is like co-first author unless things change, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, different sub areas have different kind of expectations for this kind of thing. But the approach I usually take is like, professors at the end and students at the beginning, and then sort of order it based on contribution or alphabetical if there's nothing else. We actually had this come up in the paper that we wrote together, is we had sort of written an initial version of it where Sam and I were co-first authors, and then sort of the last draft of the paper I felt I had done a little bit more work on, and so I asked Sam, is it okay if I'm first author on this one, and we just worked that out and just communicated about it. But I think there's, it's not cut and dry. It can be weird, but I think if people, if you try to keep people's egos out of it to the extent that you can, it all goes a little bit smoother.
And another thing to be aware of is the cultural difference between different countries. There's different sort of what normally happens. If you make sure you're aware of what normally happens, you won't hit the point where it's worse when people are surprised. When Harry came to me, I was like, yeah, fair enough. And it's fine when people aren't surprised, but I think surprise can normally make people less comfortable.
Thanks for the great talk. One thing that I really liked that you guys talked about was your research strengths and playing to each other's research strengths. One thing that I'm curious about is how you discover what your research strengths are. For people who aren't as sort of introspective and self-knowing as the two of you might be, how do you sort of figure out among the many tasks in research, which things you think you can contribute to best?
That's a really great question. So, one thing is, like you say, for people who aren't as introspective as, well, I think I'm not by default. Actually, in undergrad, I took a course on leadership, and in part of that, we spent a bunch of time introspecting on our own strength as leaders. So that's sort of how I know that. As far as my strength as a researcher, I think those often come from by working on something over and over, and you start to see what you're good at. But I think that like all of these are just processes of taking a lot of time and being very intentional and just paying attention to, when do I feel like I'm really in my zone, in a leadership situation or in research is just when you're like, wow, this really feels good, take a note of that and think about why that is.
Hi. I have a question about authorship that's really related to authorship, but more specifically on the dissertation. You are two PhD students that collaborate, right?
Yep.
Would you really recommend to two PhD students to collaborate in the sense that in the end what goes in the thesis must be unique and you can't really share, generally you can't really share what you contributed to. So would you really recommend logistically for two PhD students?
I think it depends on your country or your university's requirements for your thesis. So my university actually would allow me to put some of that work in. I have to say it was a collaboration. It wasn't just me. So I have to put that caveat in. But it is ultimately research that I contributed to during my studies. And for my school, that counts towards it. But also, I would recommend it because I had a great time and I learned a lot. And then if I'm going to go do a solo project that I need for my dissertation, say, I've learned so much from this experience that it really helped me.
Yeah, I'd say another way to make it a little bit easier logistically is if a more senior student is collaborating with a slightly more junior student. I've had this experience a couple of times in my PhD where I'm sort of leading a project that a newer student comes into, and it's clear that that'll go into my dissertation because I'm the one who started that work. But then later on, the other student is doing their own work, and maybe that's not what I'm doing anymore, but I keep collaborating in the background because I like working with that person. And so like I think that if you're worried about those sort of logistics, getting yourself sort of into collaborations where you'll be able to trade off that first authorship role is also helpful.
I think maybe we should cut it off there. Thank you very much, everybody.